Welcome to Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This series is on critical thinking skills in science. The previous chapter, Chapter 7, we looked at a Western science. And this is Chapter 8. We're going to be looking at a non-Western science. And what does that involve? And how can a science be different according to a Western, non-Western? When you're looking at the word science, comes from Latin, scientia, and scientia is knowledge, and that's what this whole series is about knowledge. How do we get to reliable knowledge? And so each culture, each group, each has their way of seeing things, and that's what we've built off of this quote by Stephen Jay Gould behind me on the board. He says, first, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. This is the diagram I've put together to illustrate these four factors of Stephen Jay Gould, in that we all look at the same world. And here's the world, but then as we're looking at this world, we perceive it differently because of theory, habit, prejudice, and culture. These all influence our perception processes and what we perceive, and then how we interpret what is perceived. So here we have the glasses looking at the world or observing the world, studying the world, and you've come up through the glasses, through those four different factors of theory, habit, prejudice, and culture, and the conclusion is a personal conclusion that is influenced by that person's personal perspective and belief system. So this is the quote by Stephen Jay Gould, and that is why now we're looking at a Western science versus a non-Western science, because we're looking at how do we apply critical thinking to science. Well, we've been trying to define critical thinking, and now we're defining what is science. And because to be able to apply critical thinking skills in science, we have to understand what each one of those mean. So Stephen Jay Gould's quote gives us an opportunity or into the mindset in that different cultures have different perspectives. Different cultures think about things differently. They perceive things differently. And so that will affect their observations. That will affect their knowledge. That will affect how they think and what they think about and their perspective on. Origin of scientific models, a non-Western cultural perspective. Now, there are a lot of different cultural perspectives we could take within the non-Western perspective. But what I am looking at is that being a Christian and wanting to be biblical, my parameters for seeing things and for believing things are meant to be biblically based. Now, a lot of times we can make things biblical based, but from a Western perspective. And so that skews the original intent of the original authors and what they meant to say in the biblical record. So that is why we're looking at a non-Western, but I am going to narrow it to biblical based, which would be then the Hebrew culture. And I think that is where we can often go wrong, is that where we take the right source of reliable knowledge being biblical, but then we apply a foreign perspective to that source, and we can come up with novel interpretations that weren't originally intended. Here we are with the house diagram again, combining the thoughts of Stephen Jay Gould. On the right-hand side, down below, he's got culture, and then he's got his prejudices, and then his theories, and his habits. And that's within the structure of the house. And so what we're looking at in this step right now is right at the center of the house, the 0 point, is the culture, or the German concept of the Weltbild. And that is the formation of the picture that we look through to understand and to see the world, to conceptualize it. So what we're looking at here is that, okay, point 0 is the Weltbild. Okay, what is the Weltbild? Well, ground zero, is the Weltbild, is composed of life experiences, the surrounding environment, the culture, and the beliefs. Now, what a Weltbild is something that's active, something that is pursued, something that is developed. Because it's a culture, it's something that is intentionally cultivated. And that's where we have to be careful, in that we just accept from the majority of our own culture what we're doing, and we tend to disengage, thinking wise, and we just absorb. We just look at a screen. We just do different things that do not engage a thinking process. But when the Weltbild, it is distinctly engaging a purposeful process of culture with the intent of cultivating a particular point of view. And that's where we need to be careful, in that we are particularly cultivating a biblical non-Western point of view, and that we're not just staring at a screen and absorbing what comes at us, but that we are actually discerning, and we're actually weighing things out and engaging. Is that the parameters that I should be practicing? Ground zero, Weltbild, life experiences, surrounding environment, the culture, and the beliefs. That all forms the underpinning of the house that we're putting together. Now, it's formed on non-Western cultural tendencies. The first tendency, which is a big one in comparing the Western, non-Western houses, is the universal domains of creator and created. In that, in a non-Western world, they don't separate things between the natural world and the supernatural, like we in the West have done, in that we believe that there is a natural world, and then there might be a supernatural world. And those are two separate domains that we can separate. But in the non-Western thinking, in that if you are saying that the natural world is devoid of any spiritual implications or any spiritual influences and powers, then a non-Westerner would disagree wholeheartedly, saying you cannot separate the domains of the spirit from the physical, and that the spiritual has dominion over the physical, and you cannot separate those two and pretend to study one facet, be the physical domain. So the non-Westerner says, no, there's universal domains, and that is the creator and the created. And everything that is created is subject to the creator, and that these influences play on each other through a whole dynamic process that cannot be separated out. You can't separate one off the other and just study under the microscope the material part and leave the creator off to the side. So it's a whole different way to separate down the thinking of the domains. Do we believe in the supernatural domain. It's kind of like, well, that's a Western concept. And what that means is that it's a domain that's different from the natural. And that is what we have been taught, we have been cultivated to believe in, but that is not a non-Western concept. And they would not agree to be able to separate out the spiritual from the material realms. Point number 2, the universal operating system. Because you cannot separate out the spirit from the material world, then we live in a system that is always influenced by those dynamic forces of being the spirit and the matter in the system. And so it's an open system. It's a system that is open to the influences of the spirits over the matter. Now, that would mean to them, the universal operating system, it's an open system. It's governed by the Creator and other created power sources. And they are believers. They believe in these different dimensions. Whereas when you're going back to the Western science, the Western science is built off of a whole different thinking process where they chose to deny the existence of the spirits, of the gods, of miracles, of tradition, of authority. And so they denied all that domain and all of that authority and said, we're focusing on human reason, and that is it. Whereas on the flip side, for the non-Western, it's a universal operating system. It's an open system, and it's governed by the Creator God or the Creator spirits. Number 3 is the external authority. Where is the authority? Where does reliable knowledge come from? A non-Westerner society tends to be a lot very submissive, respectful of outside authorities. And so they are more reliant on an external authority. They are more dependent on that external authority, which makes them more dependent upon the whole community. And they are cooperative. So it's a whole different mindset, a whole different way of looking at as students, or as a Western student, a non-Western student. And we're going to be getting into in the next chapters to the critical thinking and the dispositions that one must have to assert themselves to think critically and to question authority. Those things are definitely a cultural norm, a cultural perspective that certain cultures wouldn't even allow for. Sources of references. What that has to do with what in a Western world, a lot of the world or is hypothetical, is imaginary, it is future, it is projections out there. They are extrapolating to the future or extrapolating to the past. And so a lot of their sources are imaginary in that, okay, what if, we were able to do this, this, and this? And it's kind of like, for a non-Westerner, their sources of reference are historical, and they are experience-based, and that you can't really imagine in a scenario that can't be done, because you can't imagine something that hasn't been done, and you just cannot give an answer for something that can't be done. That's where one of the going back to a case study in Russia, where they were doing a study on thinking processes in these high mountain regions before the school system was coming in there, as to what was their what was the main core thinking, how did it work, and so they tried to apply hypothetical thinking questions. They said, okay, let's say that it takes you 2 hours to walk to the next town, correct? That's correct. Okay, let's say that you got a bicycle, and now instead of doing it in 2 hours, you could do it in half the time. How long would it take you? And they would just, it can't be done. So, well, I mean, just hypothetically, what would be the answer? No, you can't even, because it's too rocky. The trail is not, it's too steep, it's too this. You can't ride a bike on it. Well, what if you could ride? It didn't matter. There was no answer because it could not be done. So this is like sources of reference for a non-Western mindset is something that is very experience-based, very doable, very lifelike, and so it's like, okay, that is their God. That is who they worship and how they worship. They worship a source of reference that is historical, that they have seen, that they just don't know him because of reading about him and stories of doctrine, but because of the sources of reference and their experience with him. Okay, what would be the source of reliable knowledge? There's 4 recognized sources. Now again, 4 recognized sources within the Western tradition of philosophy. Intuitive knowledge, that is meaning it's not something that is thought out. It's something that just came to me and something I feel that it is right, and that it's instinctive, and that it's an automatic response. Intuitive knowledge. Authoritarian knowledge, okay, then that means that my knowledge is built on an authority that's external to me. So I will believe in and accept this knowledge because of it holds greater authority than me, because it is outside of me. Or is it logical knowledge, which means it's internal to me, but it's not intuitive, it's reason-based. And so that is that is another way of, and that is, okay, what Western science was originally built on, was this shift from authority, shift from intuition, shift from tradition, shift to human reason. So you can see here, this is where this shift happened. Number 4 is empirical knowledge, which means, okay, something that I have observed, and that if I have observed it, then that is a true source, then that is a reliable source of knowledge. So these are the 4 sources, recognized sources, and so our question is, what would be the source of reliable knowledge for a non-Western? Now, non-Western would be then more of a number 2, authoritarian knowledge, which would be external to themselves. So this is what we're starting to build the house up, and what it looks like with the symbols down below we have, which represents the culture and the purposeful, intentful Weltbild of those tendencies of incorporating and taking into account biblical tendency or biblical cultural tendencies. It's zero ground. That is the Weltbild. Our chosen is a non-Western cultural tendency. And what is our source? Our source of reliable knowledge then is the external source of biblical revealed knowledge within an open system. It has to be an open system for a couple reasons, because if you have revealed knowledge through Scripture, then the system has to be open for the author of that knowledge to communicate that knowledge within the system. And so that there are Christians that are very Western, and they go with a closed system, and so therefore you cannot have Scripture that has been revealed within a closed system. So in other words, their science, the only thing they can know about God is through what they can reason about God through their science field, through their studies, because they don't believe there's an open system, And if there's no open system, then there's no way for the God to have communicated. And so the only way to know about him then is through natural theology. So this is the beginning of our house structure. We're starting to build, and we're taking into account the cultural factors, or the factors that Stephen Jay Gould had mentioned, that theory, habit, prejudice, and culture. And we're starting to put together the house, including a perspective then that is non-Western. And we're going to start building our own science. This is critical thinking skills in science. This is chapter 8. We're building a non-Western science. This is session number 1. Thank you for joining us. We're Tim and Holly. You can communicate to us through the addresses on the board. And this is session number 1. Thanks again for joining.